too low or something? It's working now, right? Okay. All right, so we're ready to start Revelation 5. And before I forget, for next time, if you have time, because it is a lot of text, I recommend reading Revelation 6 through 22, so the rest of the book. Again, that's a lot of text. But the reason I want you to try to do that is you're not going to get tested on it, okay? I'm not going to make out exams. I really don't like doing that, so I'm not going to do that. But I think what I would like for you to do is try to read those texts and then try to figure out what is the best way to understand this. Is it best understood as a chronological timeline of events, or is it, as I mentioned at the very beginning, recapitulation? That is, describing the same series of events maybe like 3 times, right? Which fits better the context? And so again, if you don't have time from now until Wednesday, that's okay. We'll go through it anyway, and hopefully it'll make sense. But first, of course, we need to talk about chapter 5. And I want to begin with these important questions that I talked about last time in chapter 4. Chapter 4 and 5 are of course, contextually very similar. It's the same narrative, right? So it's the same, you could say it's a drama. It's the same vision that functions as a drama, 4 and 5. But these questions then are important, not just for 4 and 5, but also what happens afterward. Remember in chapters 2 and 3, one of the problems that those early Christians had to face is how can they overcome their obstacle or obstacles? Of course, that is our struggle too. We talked about the struggle of overcoming ourselves as an obstacle, which is, if you're anything like me, it's a serious obstacle, all right? But there are others. There are external obstacles as well. The other question that I have up here is, how can we maintain our identity? Revelation 2 and 3, but also, as I mentioned last time, much of the New Testament is about identity. So how can we maintain our identity as followers of Jesus, despite these external and these internal challenges? Well, what's the answer? The one who sits on the throne and the Lion of Judah. And that phrase, Lion of Judah, of course, is in chapter 5. So that question is answered by the content of chapter 4 and chapter 5. But what about that? Particularly as it pertains to the Lion of Judah, 6 through 21, is the unfolding of that plan. And the only person, as we'll see, the only being who can make that happen is the Lion from the tribe of Judah. So, that's how I see all this fitting together, maybe in a practical sense. All right, so let's go to chapter 5 then. And remember, I would assume the 7 churches, when they received revelation, probably someone was standing before the congregation reading the text aloud. And remember, as they're reading the text aloud, there are no chapter divisions, right? So it's not like somebody stands up like we have it and say, all right, this is chapter 5 of Revelation. Now we're starting chapter... No, it's together, right? There are no chapter divisions. So this flows nicely for 4 and 5. And I mean, technically, you could... The editors long ago could have made 4 and 5 one chapter because they're relatively short. But they chose not to do that. But let's not disassociate 5 from 4. Okay, because then it says, then I saw. So he's still, this heavenly throne scene, these beings around the throne in concentric circles, as we talked about last time. Then I saw in the right hand of the one seated on the throne, in the right hand of God, right? There's a very common circumlocution. One seated on the throne, a scroll written on the inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. All right, well, what's the most important thing about this? This scroll is sealed. In other words, it's not unrolled. And in order to unroll it, what do you have to do? You have to break the seals. Okay, we're not there yet, though. So let's talk about what this scroll written on the inside and on the back. That's weird. Most of the time, the scroll would be rolled up, and where's the writing? On the inside. Why? Anybody think of a practical reason why the writing would be on the inside? Yeah, exactly. Protect it, right? If it's going to get damaged, most likely it's out of the outside, right? So, a very practical reason. But the passage here says the scroll has writing on the inside, but also on the back. This is unusual. It's not unprecedented, but it's unusual. As I said, it's not unprecedented. This is a mural, I guess you could say, and it's from the Europos synagogue in Syria, dated to the 3rd century A.D. And I know it's hard to see, but let's see. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Yeah, there we go. All right, so if you look here, you can kind of see some writing. It doesn't really come through in this picture, but there's some writing here. So here is an example of someone who has a scroll unrolled with writing on the back. That's kind of what you have in Revelation, described in Revelation, except the key difference is it's not unrolled. It will be, but it's not yet, right? So writing on the back then was a common practice, fairly common practice. Why would you do that? What are some reasons? Well, one reason would be the material used to make scrolls was expensive. The animal hide, okay? So if maybe you didn't have a whole lot of money and you wrote everything on the front, you needed to write something else, you used the back too. It's much cheaper than going through the entire process of getting something else to write on. Okay, it's a practical reason. Another reason would be that you just ran out of room and it's probably easier to add something on the back. But there's also another reason, and that is on the back there might be a brief summary of the contents on the inside. That's probably what's going on in Revelation, so far as I can tell. And I'll explain why I think that's probably more likely. By the way, who is this? Good question. Scholars have thought, well, maybe it's Moses, Ezra, I saw somewhere, maybe Jeremiah. Doesn't really matter. Who cares? For our purposes, it doesn't really tell us. But yet again, the reason I show this is because here's an example of what's mentioned in Revelation 5. Now, I won't say always, but as almost always, there's an Old Testament precedent for the imagery used in Revelation. This is the same thing here, and that's Ezekiel chapter 2. But you mortal, son of man, is how this is normally translated. Hear what I say to you. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious house. Open your mouth. Eat what I gave you. I looked, and a hand was stretched out to me, and a written scroll was in it. He spread it out before me. It had writing on the front and the back. Written on it were words of lamentation and mourning and woe. So the scriptural precedent is here in Ezekiel 2, 8 through 10. Okay, so the way we as readers are to conceptualize what this vision is, and remember, as I said last time, I think there are different ways God could have revealed this scene to John. And so as readers, it's incumbent upon us to figure out what's the meaning of the way that he has chosen to describe it or show it to John. That's what we're trying to do here. Ezekiel 2, 8 through 10 is, I think, the Old Testament background for this idea. All right? So, writing on the front, writing on the back, but it is rolled up. And then it says, I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who's worthy to open the scroll and break its seals? So now we have what I think can be characterized accurately as this is a drama. We are to read 4, but particularly 5, as a drama. And why do I say that? Verse 3 indicates that, I think, most clearly at this point. No one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. Okay, now, the last phrase is a bit of a problem because Why? He said there's writing on the outside. Well, if he's holding the scroll with the right hand, you can see the writing, right? That's why I think the writing on the outside is probably a brief description of what's inside. What matters is what's inside. Nobody can look into that, right? When it says who's worthy and no one in heaven and on earth and under the earth, who does that include? Okay, right? But also, who else? What? Dead people? All right, they can't do it. Who else? It's just to use his language, no one in heaven, no one on earth, no one under the earth. So who's that include? What? I wouldn't say that. I think that's the exception. No. So who's that include? What? Satan, definitely. Who else? Maybe I'm asking the question wrong. Angelic beings, I am. Okay, I can take that. Okay. So it includes, all right, who else? John, okay, he can't do it, all right. I'll just say this because we don't have time to name everybody. But that's the answer. It's everybody, right? Why how could I have asked that better? Who? Well, oh, that's obvious, okay. And it's obvious I could have asked it better too, right? Yeah, that includes everybody. That's his way of saying no one in any location was able to open the scroll or to look into it. So here's the dramatic element. I began to weep bitterly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. So what does that suggest about what John understands about the scroll? Okay, now I know that's a difficult question. I thought my other one was easy, but it wasn't because I messed it up. But I think this one is more difficult. Why is John upset? I mean, it's just a scroll. He doesn't know anything about it, presumably, right? So why is he weeping? Okay. All right. Yeah, now there's a problem. He can't. Or presumably it can't be revealed, right? And I think another option is he can see what's on the outside of the scroll. Like he can maybe see the summary. What's written on the scroll? No idea. But let's assume, and I think we can be fairly certain it's got to be something like this on the back. Maybe it says something like the plan of God or whatever. And so if John saw that, it makes sense why he's upset, because it can't be unveiled. It can't be unrolled. The scroll can't. And then one of the elders, okay, so remember I talked last time about the 24 elders and their, who are they? I think this verse makes it stronger. Notice how I said that. I didn't say guarantees it, but makes the stronger case for it being an angel. And that's because in apocalyptic literature like Revelation, it's very common that you have an interpreting angel. We see it in other places in Revelation, and here I think that's a possibility. Again, I don't know for sure, but that makes sense here. All right, well, whatever exactly it is. One of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered. So he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." So that is the solution to the tension, right? Clear tension here because John is upset. The elder says to him, "Don't be upset." Because there is someone, there is a being who can open it and look into it, of course. So how many people can do this? How many beings can do it? One, right? Exactly. Okay, so this phrase, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, very common. We very commonly talk about it, hear about it. Where does this originate? Well, really, it's Genesis 49, verse 8. Genesis 49 is when Jacob calls together his sons, and now he's talking about Judah. And it says, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you've gone up. He crouches down. He stretches out like a lion, like a lioness. Who dares rouse him up? And then we have the sort of difficult phrase that from him the scepter will never depart, right? Which is the first intimation that Judah is going to have at least something to do, and I think something very important and long-lasting, of course, to do with kingship. And of course, ultimately, this is fulfilled in David, and then I guess you could say really ultimately, doesn't make any sense, I know, but finally, it's going to be the Messiah, right? So, this is Genesis 49:10, and maybe I could have had that up here. All right, so I'm sure some of us, at least, are probably familiar with that idea. But here on the right, you may think, what on earth what is this? Well, this is 4th Ezra, which very confusingly is sometimes referred to as 2nd Esdras, but I think it's easier to think about it as 4th Ezra. So what is this text? Well, it's sometimes included in the Apocrypha, but it's also a rare book that's categorized in the Apocrypha, but also the Pseudepigrapha. The Apocrypha, anybody know what that is? Now I'm putting you on the spot, right? Anybody know what the Apocrypha is?
Those are the writings that are sometimes included in the Old Testament.
Yeah, right. If you were to get a Catholic Bible, it's going to have the Apocrypha in it. Some of these books are included in early manuscripts of the Septuagint, but that's a different discussion. At any rate, 4th Ezra was written in the 1st century A.D., probably around the time of Revelation. And sometimes when I bring up these books, people ask, well, is this worth reading? This is worth reading. This is really interesting. It's a bit strange at times, and it's written from the perspective of Ezra lamenting the destruction of the first temple, but scholars assume that's a fictive setting. It's really about the destruction of the second temple, so it's post AD 70, even though, again, the fictive setting is the destruction of the first temple. So it's sort of a combination, then, of Job and some apocalypse, right? So he laments the fact that of all the nations, God has chosen to destroy Israel's temple. Why has he done that, right? He asks those sorts of questions. Now, one of the ways that God reassures Ezra that things are going to be okay are these visions toward the end of the book. And this is one of them. So he sees in chapter 11, he sees this vision of these animals, and they represent different beings, right? Which is common. We see this in Daniel and elsewhere. But at any rate, here he talks about the lion that's mentioned. So 4th Ezra 12:31, for the lion whom you saw, this is the Messiah, whom the Most High has kept until the end of days, who will arise from the posterity of David and will come and speak to them. He will denounce them for their ungodliness and for their wickedness, will cast up before them their contemptuous dealings. For first he will set them living before his judgment seat, and when he has reproved them, then he will destroy them. He will deliver in mercy the remnant of my people, those who have been saved throughout my borders. He will make them joyful until the end comes, the day of judgment of which I spoke to you at the beginning. This has many parallels with Revelation 5, but also what Revelation 5 leads to. Very similar, but for our purposes here, the two main similarities are the lion clearly refers to the Messiah, and then the second one is also, notice that he mentions, will arise from the posterity of David. Well, that's the next phrase he uses, from the root of David, or from the branch of David, right? So, does Revelation know about this text? No idea. The point is, these ideas are clear in the first century, it seems, in Revelation. Certainly, the early readers, I think, would have picked up on that, even though Genesis 49 outlines it, but I think it's clearer in 4th Ezra. Any questions or comments about this title, the Lion of Judah? All right. Then the second one, as it says, the root of David. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing here methodologically. On the left, we got an Old Testament text, which sets the precedent, but on the right, we've got a roughly contemporary text, which shows the trajectory in which Revelation flows, I think. So Isaiah 11, verse 1, a shoot shall come out from the stock of Jesse. So they're very similar, shoot, branch, root. A branch shall grow out of its roots. The Spirit of Yahweh will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel, the Spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. By the way, if you count the spirits here, you've got 7. And so later interpreters made a big deal about that. Of course, you got 7 spirits in Revelation. Is that influenced here? Maybe. But anyway, that's beside the point. It's something interesting maybe to think about. But anyway, the root of David is clearly going to be a representative of Yahweh in Isaiah 11. Okay, well, then on the right, what is this? Well, this is a text that's referred to as 4Q patriarchal blessings. What on earth does that mean? Well, this is among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls are designated by this number. What that means is that's the cave in which it's discovered. So this is discovered in Cave 4. There were 12 caves that yielded fragments or scrolls, mostly fragments. And so this is was found in Cave 4. And notice the title, Patriarchal Blessings. Now sometimes it seems like Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship has sort of moved on, and now they refer to everything by number. But I think this helps us because how does that relate? Genesis 49. It's a patriarchal blessing. So it's in that context where we have this statement among the Dead Sea Scrolls. A ruler shall not depart from Judah while Israel has dominion until the coming of the Messiah of righteousness, the branch of David, for to him and to his offspring has been given the covenant of kingship over his people for everlasting generations. So here you have Genesis 49, but you also have it linked with this title, the branch or the root of David. Same thing in Revelation chapter 5. All right? So those two titles are important. But let's talk about the lion. Again, Revelation is largely about images and the emotions that they evoke, especially in this scene, where emotion is so clearly part of the dramatic narrative. What about a lion? Like, what sort of image does that evoke?
Powerful.
Yeah. Exactly.
Someone who's in control.
All right. I mean, if I'm in the same vicinity as a lion and there's nothing to protect me from him, he's in control, right? I'm not in control because I don't know anything about how to manage a lion, okay? That's probably the last you're going to be hearing from me, right? If I encounter that lion. Yeah, exactly. But it's not just between like me and him. It's also, he evokes such power, dominion, and authority among other animals too, right? So that image is very powerful. And that image, again, like you said, evokes the notion of authority and dominion. And that's exactly the image that we would expect in a book like Revelation. Okay? So remember that. And then this second one, the root of David. Why is it important that the qualification for the one who can open the seals is that he's the root of David? Why is that? Well, David was given the promise in 2 Samuel 7, right? That he would always have a descendant upon the throne. David represents what in the Old Testament? And that, by the way, that question is not nearly as easy as I wish it was. But generally, what do you think David represents in the Old Testament?
It's probably not the answer because your questions can be tough.
That's a very kind way to put it. Yeah.
Power and authority.
Okay, and why? You're right. David definitely had power and authority, but why? What else about him? In one sense, right? The only reason I qualify that is, did he conquer more territory than Solomon? Not really. But it was the pinnacle, not only because he had this power, but because he was a righteous king, mostly, right? That's why I say generally. He was a righteous king. And he stands in stark contrast to Solomon, who gets off to a great start. But his failure essentially means the failure of Israel when they divide after that, and they're never the same. And when I mean never, I mean never. Until this day, they've never been the same that they were in the time of Solomon, which, of course, I think we could grant some responsibility, if not a large portion of responsibility, to David himself. But David stood out because, again, mostly, he was the righteous king. And so, yes, the root of David does have this notion of power and authority, but it also has righteousness. And that's where the Messiah himself is differentiated between David, because with David, was he a good king? Yes, but with qualification. There's no qualification with the Messiah as king, right? It's not, yes, he is and will be a great king. No, but with this exception. No, there's no exception. He just is, right? He is a good king. So those are powerful terms. And so again, it's shocking the next way that the same being, that Jesus, the Messiah, is referred to. And then I saw between the throne and the four living creatures and among the elders a lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered. How jarring is that, right? You've got the image of the lion, which, as you all said, is powerful authority. Same idea with David, although we would add that moral element of righteousness as a righteous king, right? But then he describes him as a lamb. Aside from the biblical connotations, which of course you can't ignore, but just in terms of this comparison, particularly with the lion, what do you think about when you see lamb here?
Meek, gentle, someone who's got to be led.
Yeah.
Doesn't know what's going on.
Right, yeah, exactly. You going to be afraid if you're in the presence of a lamb? I'm not. Maybe some of you are, but maybe I'm just tougher than you are, and I'm not. No, I don't think any of us would be. Okay, I'll put it this way. Maybe it's be a bit strange, but we're not going to feel the same way about being in the presence of the lamb as we would with a lion. And so I think that's why this is so shocking, that the image completely switches, or at least ostensibly it's a complete switch. But he says a lamb standing if it's been slaughtered. So it's not just a lamb, it's a lamb that's been slaughtered. But it says he has 7 horns and 7 eyes. The 7 eyes are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. His horns and eyes probably represent power and knowledge, right? He sees all. He knows all. So he went and took the scroll from the right hand of the one who's seated on the throne. When he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Look at verse 8. And, when these beings, the 4 living creatures, the 24 elders, when they fall before the one who sits on the throne, given his description, is anybody surprised? No, maybe we're surprised that it takes them so long to do that, maybe, right, in the narrative. But they're bowed before a lamb standing if it's been slain. Do you get how ridiculous that image is? Right? But John, in Revelation, uses this image over and over again. Right? And let me make this clear. Does the word lamb occur in the New Testament elsewhere besides Revelation and besides John 21:15? Well, yeah. But it's not the same word that's used here. And so maybe that's not a huge deal, okay? Because, for example, in John 1, John the Baptist sees Jesus. He says, "Behold the Lamb of God." Okay, there's a different word. They're similar word family. Is it really a big deal? Maybe not, okay? What's more impressive, though, is how many times this term is used in Revelation 29 times. The only time in Revelation that it's not referring to Jesus is in Revelation 13. But look at how it's used elsewhere. Sorry, I ran out of room on this slide apparently. But the Lamb is enthroned in chapter 7:17. He receives worship like he does here in 5, but he also does it at the end of, or not the end, but 7, 9 through 10. He's a shepherd. The Lamb is a shepherd. Do you see how confusing that metaphor is? And when I say this is confusing, when I say this is shocking, I mean it's on purpose, right? I want to be clear about that. This isn't like John didn't really give it much thought. No. This is on purpose. John is given these visions by God on purpose to be shocking. So the Lamb is referred to as a shepherd. In 17:14, he's a mighty warrior. New Jerusalem is his bride in 21:9, and what you can't see there is in 22, he's the light of the New Jerusalem and its inhabitants. Okay? Now again, I think it's so interesting that John uses the Lamb for all those referents, when had he used the lion, it would make more sense. So then the question becomes, why does he use lamb so many times? Anybody have an answer for that? What is it about the term lamb that is so significant that he uses it this many times, even in contexts which are talking about conquering, being victorious, having power and authority? Why is he using this term? Anybody know? Yeah. Okay, which, Isaiah 53, right? But if he's talking about, like in the context of Jesus' death, that makes sense, right? But and in Isaiah 53, it's not overt that the Lamb figure is going to conquer. Now, I would argue that the very beginning of that section is actually 52:13-15, and there it does, but not in that section. So yeah, it's clearly making that connection. But why is John using it so many times? Anybody know? Okay. The lamb does refer to sacrifice, to an offering. But the paradox is the sacrifice is actually how victory happens. Do you see that? The way that Jesus wins and the way that we win is Him dying on the cross. And I mean from an earthly perspective, from an external perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I mean, what happens right before Jesus is crucified? What do His disciples do? They scatter. Why? Well, at least for that moment, they thought, this is over, we've lost. But what does Scripture affirm over and over again? No, you didn't lose. Jesus didn't lose. He won. I think this paradox can be seen in another passage in the New Testament, in fact. This is in Colossians 2. This passage is fascinating because I think it's referring to this very idea. Colossians 2:13, when you were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive together with Him when He forgave us all our trespasses, erasing the record that stood against us with its legal demands. He set this aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and made a public example of them, triumphing over them in it. This is crazy from a Roman perspective. Why do I say that? Because when Jesus is hanging on the cross, what would the Roman authorities have thought? What did they think? What did the soldiers think? This guy's lost. He's done. And from a Jewish perspective, messiahs don't get crucified. So the Jewish people would have thought, he's lost. Paul shockingly says, no, actually he won. And instead of he being disarmed, and instead of he being made a public example, because that was one of the reasons for crucifixion, No, Jesus made them a public example. He was victorious. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, wait a minute. Isn't the victory achieved in the resurrection? The answer is yes. But I think we ought to view the victory not just in the resurrection, but also in the crucifixion. Because the crucifixion represents the atonement whereby we all receive victory as well. So I think that's why he uses this lamb imagery so many times. It's because paradoxically, the victory is won through sacrifice, through Jesus' sacrifice. Any questions or comments? Is that clear? Does that make sense? Okay, any questions or comments about that? Nobody has any comments about that? Okay. I mean, I'm not going to force you. That's fine. Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah. Yep. Right. And, yeah, it's a total win. It's a victory, right? We think about victory, of course, I think in our culture, we typically think about it in sports, right? College football championship is about to be decided. I don't really care because my team's not playing for it, so I don't care. Alabama, they never get to play for it. But anyway, I don't really care that much about it. But is it an ultimate victory, whoever wins the championship? Is that ultimate victory? Why not? They won the championship. What are you guys talking about? Exactly. Right. Right. Like she said, this is total victory. There isn't something else coming afterward where we say, all right, we got to fight another battle. Jesus has to fight another battle. No, it's done. Or at least, I guess I should say, in light of Revelation, the victory is already achieved in some sense. In some sense, there's still more to go, of course, right? Because there's still injustice, there's still death that reigns. Sin is still such a major part of human activity. So, yeah, there's more victory to come. But once that's accomplished, that's it. There is no, we think about it in movies too. There is no sequel. That's it. It's ultimate victory. That's a very good point. Yeah.
And in Hebrews, we think about the idea that perfect sacrifice, nothing else happens.
Yep. Yeah, good. Exactly. The writer of Hebrews, he makes the point that it didn't take thousands or millions of sacrifices or a sacrifice every year. It's one for all time. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point to make as well. So, again, I hope the paradox of this idea is coming across, but also there's a tremendous amount of power in the fact that John uses this term so many times to talk about the conquering Messiah. It's incredible. Yeah.
Is there a reason in 13 why the lamb word that is used is different than all of the others?
In 13?
Yes, you said chapter 13.
Yeah, sorry. Well, there it's talking about, if I remember correctly, it's talking about the sea beast. So the imagery there is probably like what you find in Daniel, where various leaders are described as animals. So I think it's just an exception. So I don't think there's any particularly strong reason why he chose it there. It's the other ones that are more important. Okay, yeah, good question. Sorry, it took me a minute to get it. All right, anything else about that? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, and I mean, in this chapter, I think it's interesting the connection between the one sitting on the throne and the Lamb. Because you're right, it's God's plan that is brought about by the Lamb. And like you said, look at the length he went to achieve this victory. not only is it paradoxical to how we normally talk about and think about victory, but it's also extremely, well, I mean, we can't even conceptualize how far he went. We can do the best we can. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. All right. He said, I saw between the throne this lamb standing as if it's been slaughtered, the 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are 7 spirits. And then verse 7, he took the scroll from the right hand of the one who was seated on the throne. When he'd taken the scroll, so think about how small of a gesture this is. He simply takes the scroll. That's all he does. The 4 living creatures and 24 elders fell before the Lamb. What are they doing here? They're worshiping the Lamb. Why? Hey, all he does is take the scroll. I mean, what is it? But what does that symbolize? That whatever it is, right? It makes it so they just fall down in reverence and worship. So what is that significance, do you think? We know later on what it is, for sure, I think. But what do you think that means? That simple act of taking the scroll. Yeah, he's going to break the seals. He's worthy to break the seals. And it's about to start. The plan is about to go into, or about to come to fruition. I think that's why they praise him in the way that they do. All right, the only thing here that I think is maybe a little bit difficult is that they're described, the 24 elders are described as holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. All right, so this last statement, bowls full of incense, that are the prayers of the saints. Like, where does that come from? Well, it comes from Psalm 141, verse 2. Let my prayer be counted as incense before you, the lifting up my hands as an evening sacrifice. Okay, so again, the author, or as readers, we're to get this scriptural connection to Psalm 141. And then you got this statement by Origen, who puts all this together, and I think he does this very well. He's a Christian writing in the 2nd into the 3rd century A.D. He says, our altars are the mind of each righteous person, from which true and intelligible incense with a sweet savor is sent up, prayers from a pure conscience. This is why it is said by John in the Apocalypse, the incense is the prayers of the saints, and the psalmist, let my prayer be counted as incense before you. So what is this saying? I think this is interesting. This is saying our prayers are what? A form of worship, which we know that, right? But in what sense are prayers worship? Anybody thought about that question? Yes, they're worship, but in what sense? So therefore, what does prayer say about our attitude toward God, maybe, is the way to approach the answer? Yeah, the recognition, is that what you're going to say? Yeah, it's a recognition of what? What? Yeah, God's power. And a recognition of his concern for us. So we might say, to use the language of Revelation that we've seen so far, we'll see it again, of course, that is, he's worthy to receive our prayer because he can do something about it, and he wants to do something about it, or at least he wants to help us. Maybe that means he answers the prayer with a yes, maybe not. But whatever the case is, we trust him, and so therefore he's worthy of our prayers. So yeah, I think that's why they use this particular language, this combination of incense and prayers of the saints. Now, what is a little bit confusing, and then I'll stop with this, but the golden bowls are used later on in a negative connotation to talk about judgment. And so there's a good reminder, and that is the author uses the same imagery, but that doesn't mean it has the same connotations every time. This is as I've said before, and as I hope is coming across, this is a very sophisticated and layered book. And it really takes a lot to unpack it. And I'm even talking about the easy parts of Revelation. Well, if there are such things as easy parts. Actually, 4 and 5, I think, are not too bad. All right, so we'll finish up chapter 5 next time, and then we'll get into when the real fun starts, chapter 6. All right, thank you.